Yeah, this box stinks, but it stinks in a good way. It smells quite nice. It has the smell of qianxiangmu. I believe the English word is agarwood, which is a wood that smells very nice that's used oftentimes as incense. So today in this video, we're going to talk about incense boxes. We're going to talk about what they are, how they were used, where they come from, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to collect them. So incense boxes are small, round boxes, okay, usually about approximately this size, and of course they were used for storing incense. Now, they're not always round. They are sometimes other shapes as well. And getting ready to drop a priceless incense box. They are sometimes also tiered, like this one. And there's some other shapes out there as well, but in general, more often than not, they tend to be round. You might hear them referred to as cosmetic boxes, or sometimes they'll be referred to as paste boxes, but most of the time, people will call them incense boxes. They're usually carved lacquer. They may also be carved wood. If they come from Japan, sometimes they're carved wood. They might be mother of pearl inlay, like this box. But more often than not, they're carved lacquer. And there's a lot of variety in these boxes, and some of them can be quite fun, even playful. Like this one I'm going to pop up on the screen of the, I believe it's a mantis. Very cute. So what were they used for? Well, we need to talk about what incense was used for first. Now, in Buddhist rituals, incense can be used to purify the room. You can also use incense to perfume clothing. In Japan, the samurai would prepare for battle by purifying their minds and bodies with incense. In China, appreciating incense was part of the scholarly culture. And of course, incense is used in the tea ceremony. So now you need something to store the incense in, which is where you end up with the incense box. And these boxes were collected. They were kept as items of status. The elite collected them, so they were very much status items. You could give them as gifts. You could give them as tribute. Perhaps they were used to facilitate exchange. Maybe you have a monk visiting from China, and he brought incense boxes with him. They would have been displayed, and these were ornaments in some ways. These were beautiful objects to be collected, displayed, and cherished. So where do they come from? Well, originally, many of them came from China, but they also came from Japan and also the Ryukyu Islands. Korea as well has their own incense boxes, though the Korean ones tend to be quite different from the Chinese Ryukyu and the Japanese ones. So to really develop an understanding of this, you need to know and reflect a little bit on the concept of tea drinking in the context of Chinese history and Japanese history. So tea drinking has been going on in China for maybe almost 2,000 years. So this is quite a long time. Japan, however, it's really maybe 1,000 years, give or take. And so the point which tea drinking really started to take off in Japan was probably around the 14th century. And that's when the tea ceremony kind of became very formalized and really locked in. So you need the accoutrements that go along with the tea ceremony. So this would mean you would need things like teacups, of course. You would need the teapots. You would need stands. You would need, the tweezers for picking up the tea. Of course, you need to burn incense, and of course, you probably need something to hold the incense. You would also need trays for incense, which is something like what this is, but that's perhaps a topic for another video. As I said, around the 14th century is when things really took off. That's when very large quantities of these sort of incense boxes started to be exported to Japan. Now, they did arrive, some of them in Japan earlier than that, in the Tang and the Song dynasties, but it really was the 14th century onward that the quantities really ramped up. So the other thing you need to understand is the relationship between the popularity of tea drinking and the driving of the elites to collect these sort of tea-related utensils, particularly and including incense boxes. And that occurred during the Muromachi and the Momoyama periods. And some scholars have really said that the tea drinking culture was really the single most dominant factor driving that sort of collecting of these objects. So the elites collected them, as I mentioned before. The feudal lords, the samurai class collected them, and they were very much valued as beautiful, desirable objects. In Japanese, these were referred to as karamono objects, which essentially means imported Chinese objects. In Chinese, the characters mean Tang dynasty goods. They were brought in and sold in special karamono shops, and they were very much prized. I will show you the way that they're often packed. I'll put up a picture on the screen so you can see. Now, the Japanese also made their own incense containers, incense boxes, and sometimes they made them in designs so closely matching the Chinese ones that you almost can't tell whether or not the item is Japanese or Chinese. So that's a little bit of a tricky part, a little bit of a thing to consider here. So how do you collect them, and what do you need to look out for? Well, the first thing you need to know is you'll probably need to find these from a reputable dealer. There's not too many of them floating around on the open market. If you find them on the open market, you probably are going to find a piece like this, which is actually 20th century. Or you will find a piece like this, which is simply a fake. So find yourself a reputable dealer or get in touch with me and I'll hook you up. Let me show you a few so you start to get a sense of the variety and what they look like. Well, there's almost endless variety. There is so many sizes, so many shapes, so many design styles, we could call it. It really is endless. But in general, for the most part, they are usually round, and they tend to usually be in one of two sizes. I will use two different examples. So here you have a larger size one, and here you have a smaller size one, okay? So for these round ones, they tend to be one of these two sizes. You'll see here a square one from the Ryukyu Islands versus this other Chinese one. And again, you see they're about the same size. Now, there are exceptions to that. As I said earlier, there are different shapes. And here you have probably a late Ming era Tishi Guri Lacquer incense box, and it's multi-tiered. So now this is a bit more rare and a bit more valuable and a bit more costly. If you don't know what Guri Lacquer is in TC, I recommend you check out my other video where I talk about what that is and how it's made. So let me show you a couple of the ones that I have here in front of me, because I have quite a range. And let me start with one of the oldest ones, which is this little box with a very, very finely carved chrysanthemum on the front. And this has a metal body. And I don't know exactly how old this piece is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 14th century. Very, very, very finely carved, like crazily finely carved. It has oxidized in color. The color's darkened quite a lot. And this can happen with lacquer exposed to bright light. So unfortunately, this is, it probably was much lighter originally. So you have pieces like that. You have pieces like this, which is a very classic Ming peony on the front, very recognizable. Okay, and you can see the inside. You have mother of pearl ones, yeah. You have interesting ones that are interesting shapes, like this is a budai. And I have yet to figure out if this piece is Japanese or Chinese. It is quite tricky. Now, this piece, as I mentioned earlier, which smells so good, has very much been used in the tea ceremony, and some of the incense has deposited in the lid. This is probably early 20th century, I'm guessing. And I believe this one is probably Japanese. You can see the pattern on the top is very beautiful, quite visually pleasing. You have that are enamelware on the inside. Now, usually enamelware points to a late piece, usually 20th century, or if you're lucky, 19th century, although it's possible even a little earlier, but rare. I want to highlight this one because this piece is a great example of a later piece. This piece is probably late 19th century. However, this piece is impeccably well carved. This is a very good little incense box. The detail, it's excellent. And it's a good example of how you can buy late stuff, but you don't need to buy junk. A lot of people buy this late export lacquers, lacquerware, carved lacquer, and it tends to be junk. And when you look at this box, you don't need to do that. This box is a great little box. But I'm getting off topic. So a couple of general guidelines, though, as I said, odd-shaped ones usually cost a bit more. Multi-tiered boxes will definitely cost more. Older rather than newer will cost more. Guri Lacquer usually costs more because it's highly sought after. And something that is surprising about these is these small ones can be very expensive. They can cost as much as the larger ones, if not more. And that applies across the board to incense boxes. Small objects can cost quite a bit more than large objects. Okay, that's enough rambling today about incense boxes. If you like this video, feel free to leave a comment, click like, click subscribe. That lets me know that you like this kind of content, and it tells me I should make some more videos for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.